right, so we're talking something very interesting today. Heritage Day and Lobola. It is an intrinsic part of getting married for many South Africans. But the question we're discussing this morning, is it a traditional or legal process? That's an interesting one. Here to take us forward on this conversation, we've got John Manyike, who's the head of financial education at Old Mutual. John, it is so good to see you, and you look amazing.
Thank you, and it's always great to come here.
Yeah, thanks for dressing and embracing your heritage. We were joking off air and saying, I'm sure your colleagues are looking and saying, John, is that really you?
Yeah, no, maybe they think it's my twin brother.
No, you should dress like that all the time. You should do it all the time. Yeah. Okay, so let's talk Lobola and let's talk the law. Yes. Are they intertwined with one another?
Yes, they are. I think it's very important for people to understand that Lobola itself is not marriage. It is part of a traditional and legal process of getting married. The law that governs customary marriage is called the Recognition of Customary Marriages Act. And it actually stipulates what needs to happen. So in other words, for a customary marriage to actually be concluded or to be legal or to be valid, the couples must have, firstly, they must have concluded Lobola negotiations. It must be a marriage between prospective spouses above 18, but more importantly, they must have celebrated that customary marriage in accordance with the customs.
Okay.
You know, so in South Africa we have different ethnic groups. So you must celebrate according to the customs and the rituals that are performed by your relevant ethnic group.
And until that moment, it is not legal.
Yeah.
So you've got to, there's the Lobola and then the celebrations.
100%. So the celebration could be done differently depending on you know, given the diversity of cultures that we have. So celebration includes things like the song and dance, the welcoming of makoti, the exchange of blankets and gifts, you know, umembe, so you know, or tabela mahadi. Those things must take place. If you have not celebrated in accordance with the customs, you have not concluded that. The other thing that's important to mention is the registration of their marriage with the Department of Home Affairs.
Okay.
But it doesn't mean that if you have not registered the customary marriage with Home Affairs that it is invalid. However, it is essential because it will help you in the future, you know, to solve many challenges that may present themselves. Because remember, a marriage talks to your property rights. It talks to your access to the joint estate of that particular marriage. So if you don't have a legal document or contract, you find it very difficult to enforce your legal rights.
So it's an important aspect to remember in all of this. So when you may go through the Lobola, you may go through the ceremony and all the traditions, but if you do not write this and register your marriage with Home Affairs, it may not actually be recognized by the state.
Yeah, so
and that's where the problem comes in.
Yeah, look, there are instances where couples have not necessarily registered their customary marriage with Home Affairs, but as I said, it does not render it invalid. But it does help you when you've got a legal contract, a document from Home Affairs that, you know, has solemnized your marriage, because that is one thing that you can be able to use to prove that you are married. Yeah. But the biggest challenge here is that many couples would pay Lobola and they will take a long break, you know, because there's an assumption that the biggest part of the marriage has been concluded by simply paying Lobola, but and then neglecting to actually celebrate. And you know, and it's very important to ensure that your marriage is built on a solid foundation. Because if the foundation of your marriage is not solid, legally speaking, that's where you have issues. For example, if your partner decides to leave you because they've met someone who's slimmer, younger, you have serious problems. How are you going to enforce your rights? Or in the event of a death of your spouse, you know, how do you have yourself recognized as a surviving spouse unless you have concluded the marriage legally? All
right. Now, I want to talk about something that set social media abuzz recently, and that was, I think it was on a drama series on Mzansi Magic, or was called The Queen, where they were talking about getting a refund for Lobola. Okay. Now everybody asking the question, can you get a refund?
Unfortunately,
no. No, you can't.
You can't get a refund once. I mean, you know, it's dangerous to say, but you've already tasted the milk.
Ketile.
100%, you know, so you can't ask for a refund. And I think the other funny thing now that you say that is that remember in the olden days, you know, people used to exchange kettles because then, you know, it was the primary source of wealth and, you know, a medium of exchange. Now, these days, people don't bring cattle when there's Lobola negotiation. People live in suburbs, they live in townships, you know, but there is a cash equivalent of a cattle, you know. And I won't be surprised, Leanne, in future if, you know, our young ones are going to pay Lobola via EFT.
Wow.
You know, because
that's how we move
society evolves. Because what is important is the principle of exchanging the you know, gifts and the bride price.
Yeah. So tradition and legality are, it's a very difficult thing to mix. It really is, because you'd think that, okay, you're getting divorced, you want to get that back. But then again, I'm going to bring it back to simplicity and saying, you know, when I got engaged, my husband came and gave me an engagement ring.
Yes.
Now, you know, if we break off our marriage, do I give him back the ring? I mean, he's not entitled to it. So, you know, I can keep it, I suppose, and maybe it works in the same way.
Yeah.
But mixing tradition and the law.
Yeah.
Where are we with that? Because, you know, inherently the law and tradition, I mean, we celebrate Heritage Day, and yet do we celebrate it enough in principle, on paper, when it comes to saying, you know, this is what happens, but then, of course, you go to a court of law and they don't really recognize it.
Well, look, the lawmakers recognize the wealth of our heritage. And so when they were defining this particular piece of law, which is the Recognition of Customary Marriages Act. So they took into account those customs. That's why it states very clearly, Section 3 of that act states clearly that you must have concluded Lobola and it must be celebrated in accordance to your custom, because the lawmakers were ensuring that we harness and embrace this heritage that we have. So that's why it's important to, yes, you know, follow through with the tradition, because it was not tradition to just pay Lobola and end things there. The tradition required that you actually transfer the bride, incorporate the bride, welcome the bride, exchange gifts, and celebrate, because that's how it was done. So if you have not done that and you've just concluded Lobola, it means technically you have the same status as cohabiting partners.
Yeah, yeah. You know, one of my producers asking me a question. You mentioned that it may go to a point where we actually do an EFT for Lobola. I mean, you joke about it, but, you know, there's no joke in that. That may very well be what will happen. But now you have proof of payment. There you've got an actual sum of money that has a value to it. I mean, surely you can argue this one now.
No, 100%. I mean, again, you know, people sometimes ask, but how do you prove that you've celebrated? I mean, it's simple. I mean, when there's celebration, you take pictures, you post on Instagram, on Facebook. Those pictures, you know, they are evidence, you know, that actually there has been a celebration. And if there's any dispute and you present that as evidence, the courts would certainly look at those things. And of course, there are witnesses and people who were part of that particular celebration.
Yeah. Look, I mean, let's sort of maybe put the heritage side of things to one side and talk about the fact that as men and women enter into sort of a marriage, I mean, it is important that you go and sign contracts, whether it be in community of property or anti-nuptial contract, especially if you own your own assets like property before marriage. What do you recommend is the best route to go?
Well, in this country, there are 3 laws in which marriages can be formed. So one is the Marriages Act of 1961, and then there's a Civil Unions Act, and then there's the Recognition of Customary Marriages Act. But there's also matrimonial property systems where you can be married in commuter property and out of commuter property. I must hasten to add as well that customary marriage amounts to incommuter property. So in a property system where you decide to separate your assets, where you're saying, you know, let's get married, but we want to separate assets. So you can marry with an antenuptial contract without accrual. That means your debts and your assets and liabilities belong to you, and you alone. But if we're saying incommuter property, it means it's a joint estate and we share. And these things are important because these days when you marry someone and you say you're marrying someone who's over-indebted, they come with a 5 million debt, and you decide to marry an incommuter property, it means you now own half of that debt, as much as you would have owned half of the assets if the person was wealthy. So it's also very important these days to inquire from your prospective partner who's proposing marriage, you know, what is his credit profile? I mean, what is his debt status? You know, remember, Elian, in those days, when people wanted to take their relationship to the next level, you could actually ask that you go for HIV tests. What stops you from asking for a person's credit report before you get married? So you decide, are you marrying in commutable property or out of commutable property? Of course, there are other things that you need to take into account. You have children and other things, that needs to be taken into account to ensure that there's no crisis or confusion in the event of death. Yeah.
Absolutely. Marriage is a wonderful thing, but it is, at the end of the day, sometimes, besides the love, it is a business transaction. And you've got to look at it that way sometimes, because this is for life, and this is your livelihood as well that you've got to look after. Thank you for talking to us, and some of the valuable information. We've had a wonderful, wonderful response from Twitter, so it's good to see you watching the program, and also I'll try and read some of them to you. John Manyike is the head of financial education at Old Mutual, talking about the legal rights of customary or traditional marriages, such as Lobola negotiation. Can you get a refund? The answer, in simple terms, no. It's been given, and that's the end of that. All right, 9 minutes to the top of the hour. Let's take a break. We've got a clock start after this. Stay tuned.